So the last book I read was Christopher Priest's The Affirmation. It's the first Christopher Priest book I read. It won't be the last. So normally I'll give a quick summary about what the book is, my thoughts about it. Um, I'm really reluctant to do that for this one because I think the less you know about this book going in, the better. So all I would say is it's worth it's worth reading, and it's good, not great. I think I'd give it about 3.5 out of 5. I thought the ending was good. It's sort of satisfying in a slightly unsatisfying way. But I liked it. I thought it was worth getting to at the end. Um, but even like the introduction of this book, I read the guy writing the introduction. I can't remember his name. I can't actually even remember the version I've read. I'll try and link it in the description if I remember. But even that introduction says, "Don't read it. Just watch. Just sorry. Don't don't read reviews about it. Just read the book." And I would completely agree with that. I think that's a sensible way of doing it. And actually, looking at Christopher Priest in general, I think that is true for most of his more famous books. So, if you're sensitive to spoilers, now is the time to turn off. I'm still going to give a review of my thoughts. They're going to be as spoiler free as I can possibly make them, but I will be giving away not so much the story, but a little bit about the kind of what I see it at least as Christopher Priest's underlying message that he's trying to write in this book and what he's trying to get you to think about. If you consider that a spoiler, I would I would turn off now. Basically, the book almost doesn't have a lot going for it apart from this theme that he's trying to explore. I suppose there is a mystery and there's a little bit of an interesting underlying plot going through, but really the appeal to the book to me is was one, how it was going to wrap up things in the end, and two, this kind of message that I think Christopher Priest is trying to explore and um, trying to get you to view the world in a slightly different way. And that theme is really centered around memory, experience, what makes a person who they are, and how the kind of history of someone builds up to become the person that they are today, and also um, what we mean by truth and objective truth, and are there kind of higher levels of truth that humans do or don't explore, which actually, if I was watching this review, that would be enough for me to go, you know what, I'll give that a go. And I think I just, I don't think this book lives up to the expectations that are set from that. I don't think it doesn't really teach me, it didn't really teach me anything new about the world. It didn't really it didn't change my thought processes. And other books have, right? So Blindsight did to an extent. The book I'm currently reading, which is called The Philosopher's Stone, I think really will. There are certain books where you just have this moment where you go like, oh yeah, I'd love to see the world in that light. And I think this book could have done that, and it didn't. Now, the reason for that, I think, I can't quite figure this out, and I'm quite interested to see what you guys think in the comments, actually. So, this kind of message and this thing he's trying to teach in the book, and this way of looking at memory and the self and truth, is told through the eyes of the main character. The main character is pretty obviously a troubled character and not overly a particularly likable character. There's some really interesting things the author does actually in setting that and setting your expectations and subverting your expectations about the character, which I thought were really well done and really interesting. But the issue is, it's this character trying to teach you this message about truth and objective truth and um, the things building up to the self and all the things I've said like 4 or 5 times already. Sorry for repeating myself. But it doesn't quite stick the landing on those. It feels like kind of flaccid and weak. And it sort of, he sort of just says these points about truth mainly, and then tries to build on that. But he just almost takes it as read that it's convincing and that you as a reader would be convinced by this. There's sort of no real explanation. It's just kind of, there's this truth that we see and then there's a higher truth. I don't want to say any more without spoilers, but this point is, I think, not very convincingly done at all. I think it could have been if it had been explored more, but it wasn't. And what I can't figure out is that because this character isn't very convincing, isn't very articulate, isn't very likable, is it part of his personality that he doesn't really explain these thoughts very well, or because he's troubled, or because he's got all these other things going on, he's sort of a bit warped in his mindset, and that's why these points don't really land and aren't really convincing? Or is it just that the author's not skilled enough to convey this message? And I think it's the former, not the latter, because Christopher Priest is very, very well regarded, and kind of known for this sort of thing about conscious and memory. He's written a lot of books about that have convinced a lot of people. So I suspect it's the former, not the latter. But and also it might just be that I'm not wise enough to be able to really kind of cling on to these ideas and really get the message that the author's trying to convey. That's perfectly possible as well. But for me, yeah, it just didn't quite land. And I ended up thinking like I could have been convinced. It could have been something interesting, but I just wasn't. Now that might be, I may need to reread it. I may need to slow down when I read it. I read it very, very quickly, actually, even though I wasn't like loving it. I read it in like, I don't know, 3 days, which is quite quick for me. And normally, I don't kind of prioritize my time on reading that much, but I did with this one, and it was more like I was just trying to get through it rather than I was really excited to read it and see what was going on. But nonetheless, that's something worthy of consideration, I think. Yeah, I feel almost just like leaving it there. It's worth reading, it's worth your time, but I'd be really interested in seeing what people think about this. I definitely will be reading more. And one thing I haven't done, which is really silly before doing a review like that, but I haven't really looked up anything about it. I haven't read any good read reviews. I haven't read anything. I don't know what the consensus is. I don't even know if this point I'm making is, something that anyone else has picked up on it. I'm sure I'm sure someone has. But, I may just have way, way, way missed the point here. But this is kind of the point of the channel, is just for me to get my thoughts on the camera early. So when I've, considered the book in more detail, in more depth, I can then go back and rewatch what my original immediate thoughts were. But I think actually, ultimately, I think this book is quite forgettable. I don't think I'm going to be talking much about this book in, say, the next year or so, except to reference that it's a Christopher Priest book that I read. I think I'm going to forget almost everything about it. And actually, I read it maybe like, I've been trying to get this video done a while ago, but I haven't had the chance. So this is as close to my immediate thoughts as I could realistically do. But it was probably like a week ago. And already, other than the ending and a couple of scenes, I'm struggling to really keep grips with the book. And I may need to reread it. It's another one I'd probably chalk up to be reread. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to know what you guys thought. I know it's quite a popular book, so I'd be really interested in hearing other people's opinions on this one. Cheers.